Good morning, everyone. I'd like to dedicate today's learning in memory of my mother, Mrs. Shalamis Rabinowitz, Shalamis Bas Rav Yaakov Eliezer. We are on Mishna Meiser Sheni, Perikei, Chapter 5, Mishna Zayin, Mishna 7. It's a short Mishnah we're going to do Mishna Zayin and Ches today, 7 and 8. Mi shahayu loy peres bazman hazeh. A person who has Meiser Sheni produce in nowadays, which means without a Beis HaMikdash. And without a Beis HaMikdash, Meiser Sheni cannot be even Yerushalayim. There has to be a Beis HaMikdash to be able to do so. One has to still separate the Meiser Sheni from one's produce. There's really not much you can do with it. And if you were to redeem it, there's nothing you can do with the money. So a person who has Meiser Sheni fruits nowadays, the Yigiyah Shas HaBir, and the time for beer came. What are you supposed to do? Beis Shammai say, Tzarech l'chalalon ala kesef. Beis Shammai interpret words from a verse in the Torah to say that although that when the time for beer comes, beer means we have to remove all the things we're supposed to separate and give them to where they're supposed to go to or destroy, Meiser Sheni, as we mentioned yesterday. So now, when there's nothing you can do with the Meiser Sheni, Beis Shammai say that you still have to go ahead and redeem it onto money. For the process of to do the mitzvah of beer nowadays, again, this is based on how Beis Shammai interprets words in the Torah. You have to take that produce, redeem it onto money, and then take the money and destroy the money, which means either grind it up, throw it into a river, or throw it into the ocean. That's what Beis Shammai say nowadays you have to do. Well, Beis Hillel say, echad shein kesef, echad shein peres. Whether they are already in a state of money, meaning this money that Meiser Sheni was redeemed onto, or whether it's the actual Meiser Sheni produce itself, they're both the same. There's really nothing to do with it. And therefore, it doesn't make sense, Beis Hillel argue, to say that you have to redeem it onto money. What are you gaining from redeeming it onto money? There's nothing gained. And therefore, Beis Shammai says you got to redeem it onto money and destroy the money. Beis Hillel say you don't have to bother with that. You basically destroy the Meiser Sheni produce itself. Now, how do you do that? So what you do is you basically put it aside and let it rot. That's what you'd have. That's how you would destroy the actual Meiser Sheni produce. Which would be true even when there is a Beis HaMikdash, that if you didn't bring that we had before, you have to destroy the Meiser Sheni. I don't remember if we actually saw specifically how that's described being done. Misparim, they have to be destroyed. Just seeing here, is there any specific way? Yeah, no one here mentioned specifically in the previous Mishnah, there was no mention of specifically how to do it, but here the commentaries say basically what you do is with the produce is you put it aside, you don't want anyone else to come eating it, and you let it rot. So that's the machlokes, that's the argument to Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai say that you're going to have to destroy it, but you first redeem it onto money and destroy the money. Beis Hillel say there's no difference. Even if it's the produce itself, you would destroy it by putting it aside and letting it rot. In the times of Beis HaMikdash, of course, you would try to get it to Yerushalayim and eat it there. But even in the times of Beis HaMikdash, if you didn't do that, you'd have to destroy it and would be in the same way. Ches, Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, Barishona originally, Hayusholchen Eitz Ba'alei Batim Shebedinos. The sages in Yerushalayim would send a message to the householders that were outside of Yerushalayim. So apparently, maybe they weren't as learned, or they just wouldn't. The situation for them wouldn't work as much as it does in Yerushalayim, but they would receive a message: "Maharu v'haskinu es perei seichem." Hurry and rectify and fix up your fruits ad shelo tagia shas habir, before the time for beer comes. So the Chachamim were concerned with the following: the Torah says that when it comes to beer, when it comes to this removal, this destruction, the Torah calls it kodesh. Whatever is called kodesh, called holy, beer has to be performed on that. Now, if you have grain, right, harvested grain, we know that there are, or produce, let's call it, there are different stages when it comes to the obligation of separating Shumas and Maasros. You have a stage where it becomes edible. At that point, it is not yet completely processed. The obligation for Truma has not really taken place upon the fruit at that point of time. And actually, you're not even allowed to separate Shumas and Maasros at that point. If you did, it would work. But before we have the Gemar Malach, before we have the completion of the processing, you're not allowed to separate Shumas and Maasros. If you did, it would work. When you get to the Gemar Malacha, that means the completion of the processing, which, for instance, when it comes to grain, wheat, it means that it's harvested, piled, and smoothed out. That is the completion of the processing, and that is when the full obligation of separating Shumas and Maasros takes place. That's when you're allowed to do it. So if the Torah says Bi'arti HaKodesh, that means I have to go ahead and remove the holy. Tevel, which is what we call produce before the Shumas and Maasros are separated, is forbidden to eat because it has Shumas and Maasros in it. It is considered Kodesh, it's considered holy. So at whatever point of time that I can call that Tevel Kodesh, I can call it holy, the mitzvah beer is going to relate to it. So it's possible that even before I actually separate the Shumas and Maasros, when I still have Tevel, when I still have produce that nothing's been separated from it, that could already be called Kodesh, could already be called holy, and the mitzvah beer is going to apply to it. So originally, the assumption of the sages is that once it becomes edible, which means you could theoretically separate Shumas and Maasros from it, you're not allowed to do it then, but you could have done it. If you would have done it, it would have worked. Then already the Tevel, this untied, this grain that nothing was separated from, it's Tevel, you're not allowed to eat from it. It's called Kodesh. It's already edible, so you're not allowed to eat from it. Well, that could be B'drabanan. But the fact that I could separate my Shumas and Maasros from it would give it it would be considered Kodesh, holy, and therefore the law of beer takes place. Now, in order to do the beer properly, you're going to have to separate the Shumas and Maasros, and then depending on what is you're separating, deal with it appropriately. But before you even separate it, you're going to have to actually process it because you can't separate until you process. So if it's even before the processing is completed, it's edible, but the processing hasn't been completed. In order to do beer, if beer already takes effect on the grain at this point of time, you have to process it, then you have to separate it, then you got to get it to where it's supposed to go. If it's Shum and Meiser Ani, it goes to those people it's supposed to go to. If it's Meiser Sheni, then you're supposed to take it to Yerushalayim. So therefore, when it came to the householders that were outside of Yerushalayim, and apparently we were concerned, the sage was concerned that they wouldn't realize that beer is coming. Therefore, they sent them a message. And the message was, hurry up and take care of your fruits before beer takes place so that you can get the mitzvah done. And since there was a lot to get done, you had to process it, separate it, and do with it what you're supposed to do. Therefore, they sent this message early enough for all that to happen. So apparently in Yerushalayim itself, there was no need. Apparently Yerushalayim people knew the beer was coming. Outside, they were concerned. They wouldn't know. And therefore, they would send a message to the people to get ready before beer comes to make sure they can get the mitzvah done properly. But again, the point was that this was taking place at an early stage. The sages originally held that once it's edible, where it's possible to separate Shumas and Maasros from, beer would already take effect there. So already, since there's so much to do, they sent these messages beforehand. At Shabar Rabbi Akiva v'limed, until Rabbi Akiva came and he taught, any fruits that have not yet come to the time of Maasros, which in this context means any fruits that have not yet been, their processing hasn't been completed, and therefore the full obligation for separating Shumas and Maasros has taken place, and the permission to separate Shumas and Maasros takes place. Turim and Abir, they are exempt from beer. Meaning, although Rabbi Akiva, of course, agrees that after it's edible, you're not allowed to separate Shumas and Maasros, but if you did it, it would work. Nonetheless, Rabbi Akiva said, since at that point, and before the process is completed, since at that point I may not separate Shumas and Maasros, I can therefore not call this tevel kodesh, and beer would not apply. And if beer doesn't apply, then it doesn't apply. So if the processing, Rabbi Kiva said, so if the processing is completed, it's already permissible to separate Shumas and Maasros, then already it's called kodesh, and the mitzvah beer is going to apply. But earlier than that, even though if you separate Shumas and Maasros, it would work, since you're not allowed to do that, it's not called kodesh, it's not called holy, and therefore beer doesn't apply. And since the beer doesn't apply at such an early stage, there was no more necessity to send a message. Only when they thought that the beer would apply at this early stage of edibility, which means you've got to process it and then do everything you're supposed to do, then they sent out the message. But once the mitzvah beer only starts once the processing is completed, at that point of time already, they didn't feel a need to have to send out the message because of the fact that, there would be enough time by the time they found out to have to take care of, by the time they realized, let's put it that way, there'd be enough time for them to take care of what they need to do for the mitzvah beer to be done. Okay, we are now continuing with the laws of Lashon Harah from the Chavetz Chaim, Klal Zayin, chapter 7, Sif Gimel, paragraph 3. Kashem she'asar lakabel Lashon Harah b'shem echad. The same way that we have stated it's forbidden to accept Lashon Harah if you hear it from one person. Same thing would apply if I hear it from two or more people, meaning I'm hearing it from a number of people that could be considered witnesses. And of course, if they become wicked people through their speaking Lashon Harah, wicked people here means that if by their speaking Lashon Harah, we see them as sinners, meaning they're telling you something, two people are telling you something that has no relevance. It has nothing with protecting yourself, nothing with protecting others, nothing with helping out this person, nothing. It's straight Lashon Harah. When a person speaks Lashon Harah, they become a rasha. It means they are now acting as wickedly, sinfully. There are times where a person gets the status of a rasha, and there are some practical halakha ramifications that come from that. That's not necessarily going to come here at this point. We just need to say that being that they are sinning in what they are doing, and we know they're sinning what they're doing, then for those people you for sure can't believe. Based on their own words, even if it's true what they're saying, they are basically stating in their actions, they are saying that they have transgressed the prohibition of speaking Lashon Harah. Therefore, at this point, they're sinful. How can we then even? We don't have any basis to believe them about what they're saying about a Jew who, up to this point of time, has an established status of doing things right. Because if you are suspect of speaking Lashon Harah, if we already see that you're ready to sin when it comes to speaking Lashon Harah, then we already say, and what's going to stop you from lying or from exaggerating? Nothing. Basically, if you're sinning, if you're wicked, you're being a rasha, if you're acting wickedly in this statement, then there's no basis to believe you. If we see you're ready to sin when it comes to speaking Lashon Harah, then you've lost your trustworthiness. We should already suspect you're going to lie, you're going to make up things. The fact that it's two people doesn't help. Two people who are acting wickedly are two wicked people. But let's say they're saying something that, if true, would not make them be Rishayim, meaning they're telling you information that you need to know. Okay, so if it's true what they're saying, they're okay. They're not doing anything wrong. We can't see these people based on this statement that they're speaking Lashon Harah because they're not necessarily. Nonetheless, he's still not allowed to accept it as the truth. Because the only time two people testifying gain the status of witnesses and therefore are believed is only in a basin, only in a rabbinical court. But outside of a rabbinical court, they don't gain that status. Let's say they lied. Are they now called false witnesses? No, it didn't happen in the basin. They're called people who spread rumors, people who spread bad news, or who spread lies, rather. Now again, what we're saying until now, everything we're saying now is about believing. But when it comes to, again, to taking it into consideration, I was mentioning before, that it's permissible to hear it, accept it, research it, even if you only heard it for one person, as we have stated previously. Have a wonderful day.